everybody. I am the Reginald L. Jones Fellow at the Indianapolis Recorder. And this week with us, we have the Stephen Lane, Indianapolis Public Library Board Member. Stephen, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much, Tasha, for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell my listeners and viewers and readers who you are.
Absolutely. I'm born and raised right here in Indianapolis, graduated from Lawrence Central High School, where I then went on to IU Bloomington to study anthropology, and then went into the Peace Corps, and then
Thanks.
decided to come back. When I got back from the Peace Corps, I started working for the Indianapolis Public Library in an hourly position. And then I was really inspired to become a librarian by attending the Black Caucus of the American Library Association conference that was in St. Louis at the time. And I just remember being so inspired by all the Black librarians from all over the country and
Oh,
everything that they were doing and all the projects they were doing and completing. And I also met one of my favorite authors, Walter Mosley, at that conference. And just being so inspired, I went ahead and just signed up for library school right then and there in that conference. So I think that it just always shows like it's great to have people who look like us in all these different professions, especially librarianship, where we're all about connecting our patrons to library resources and all the possible information. My mentor, Nichelle Hayes, she always says, like you can go to Google and look up information you want and you'll get like a million different answers. But if you go to the librarian, you'll get the right answer. So I've always loved that saying that she says.
yeah, I love her too. I invited her to be a part of the conversation, and so I am going to get an opportunity to interview her in regards to her thoughts. I just want to back up a little bit in regards to representation and how representation actually matters. I'm glad that you spoke to that. And oftentimes people forget the importance of the role of the librarian, right? Because we take it for granted, right? Like it is a occupation that we take for granted. And now in the country and abroad, we see this attack on freedom of speech. We see this attack in regards to the banning of books, in regards to what books are okay for my family, what books are okay for your family, but the government should control all of that. And it seems like there is a boundary being overstepped. Can you speak to the importance of that representation, one, and then also the thought process of why freedom of speech and what is the role that the library plays in that in regards to banning books and freedom of speech and that matter?
Absolutely. So yeah, I believe that the library should reflect the community that it serves.
Oh,
I
wonderful.
think the library needs to stand as a place where everyone can feel comfortable entering in that space and everyone feels comfortable getting the services they need in that space. And I think that's why it's so important to create like a diverse workforce and try to promote from within. Like if you have like with us as marginalized people, Black and Brown people, LGBTQ people, there are barriers to accessing the education necessary because you have to get a master's degree in library science in order to serve in that library role. And there are so many great library workers that don't have that master's degree, but would like to get it, but there are barriers to that access. So I think part of my role as library board member is how can I use this position to help remove some of those barriers for library workers so that we can have a more representative and diverse librarian pool to even pull from.
I,
But
I'm sorry.
yes. Oh,
I
go
just
ahead.
I want to stop you right there because some my audience may not be very familiar with you and your route, right? So you wanted to do this work, you pursued doing this work. You started off at the library, and then you worked your way up to became a master librarian, and now you're on the board. And so you know these steps in regards to what it takes to actually get to the librarian and what role you played along those steps. So sometimes that's missed. That trajectory shouldn't be missed, right? Like we should have that unfurled. And not only that, but you know, because you worked all of those steps, how difficult it was. And so I appreciate that thought process. I'm sorry, go ahead,
No,
continue.
that was great. I never really like processed it in such a way, but that's a really good point. And just encouraging my other fellow board members to, talk to staff at all levels of the library and get their feedback. I think it's so important in order to help us navigate, the approval of budgets and what gets funded and what doesn't get funded. But yeah, I think the role of the library is to be that cornerstone of democracy where all different ages, races, different socioeconomic statuses can all come to a space where there's neutral ground where they can just be. It should be a communal space. It should be a space where people can do research, explore their interests. And at the public library, there's that element of bringing in culture into the environment to really just highlight the diversity that we have right here in Indianapolis. I remember one of my favorite events was called Lucha Libre, where we worked with a Mexican American artist who brought in a wrestling ring and some luchador wrestlers. And they had a wrestling ring right there in Central Library, and they had all these wrestling matches, and it was just so much fun. And learning about the history of luchadors and having books displayed so other people can learn about luchadors. I thought it was such a fun event that really targeted a lot of diversity within our city, even
Yeah,
though it's geared for like a Latino population.
yeah.
Like it definitely piqued the interest of a lot of people. So I think, with that said, there's also the diversity in knowledge and information. And if we target certain information, especially when it's coming generated from marginalized people, that information is being targeted, and information that teaches children about their bodies, that information is being targeted for removal from the library. And I think that is to the detriment of the public, and to the interests and educational interests of the public. And if you don't like a certain book, there's not a big formula to it. You just don't have to read it. But we should not be restricting what others want to read in such a way.
Yeah, I love that thought process. There's two or three things that you said in there that I really want to touch back on quickly. I love the expansion of what diversity looks like and to who it's for, right? Like, so many times people just get caught in that word diversity, and having diverse knowledge is equally as important as having diverse staff. And I appreciate that thought process and what the library has done to ensure that. One of the things that I say, when I travel, even internationally, one of the things that I do is go to libraries because that's one of my favorite places. And I really believe that the Indianapolis Central Library got it right with the way that they did the design of the new library. It's an amazing library. So in some cities you can go to libraries and they feel like, really like a jail cell. And some cities they've gotten it right. Indianapolis got it right. I think Seattle's library is amazing. I just got back from Alexandria, Egypt, and I got an opportunity to see their library, and I thought that the design of the library was amazing. One of the things that I wanted to see more of was Black authors, right? Egyptian authors for children. I mean, stories for children, and that was something that I thought lacked in that library, and I hope that they're able. I left my suggestion. I hope that they're able to improve upon that. But I agree with you in that thought process. If you are not wanting this book, you don't have to check it out, right? But that is not your responsibility to tell me what I can check out, what is available for my students. And I think Toni Morrison said it best when she said, it is not your responsibility to tell me and my children what we can read, right? That is not your responsibility. And living in this free country, or what we consider a free republic, that's a hard pill to swallow, seeing that these types of things are happening around the country. Did you want to lend thought to that?
Absolutely. I think it's been really difficult to watch some of these book bans go into effect, and targeting children and what kids can read. I remember my mom, she would not really restrict what I could read when I was a child. Like, I was really interested in everything, scary stories. I read Goosebumps,
Yeah.
Are You Afraid of the Dark, or Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, excuse me, but also that TV show. And I just remember just loving the stories, and I just would just keep reading, and I wanted to read more because that was something that I was very interested in. And my mom was like, "Oh my goodness, he's gonna have nightmares. Like, he's gonna have," but you know what? He's reading, so I'm gonna just let him read. And then at some point, I believe in middle school, I moved myself up to Stephen King books. And I was like, oh, I want to read a Stephen King book. I want to see if I can get through it. And it was like, you're challenging yourself, you're challenging your reading level by, just maybe dabbling into reading an adult book when you're in middle school or high school and things like that. And that just helps you develop that literacy skills is going to help you advance in your education and things like that. So and for a small group of people to decide what the majority of people get to read is detrimental to society, and it just drags us down. For example, if let's say, there was a group that didn't want to have luchadors in the library for whatever reason, and they restricted the library from doing anything about it, they banned it. Well, then that event wouldn't have touched people outside of the Mexican American community who experienced something different, experienced something new. And that's something that libraries are so good at, is getting you to think from a different perspective or offer different perspectives. And so it's really upsetting to see these book bans go into effect. I know that at Hamilton East Public Library up in Fishers, their board recently told the library to spend $315,000 to review children's books materials, and anything that the board deems inappropriate needs to be moved over from the children's department to the adult section. And these books are primarily comic books, as well as books that teach children about their bodies. And comic books, have art form in there, it has storytelling, it has literacy, and it's a great way to develop your imagination and appreciation for art.
I love that thought process. I'm going to pause just for a little bit because you touched upon a couple of things. And as an educator, I am an educator and a writer, really a writer first and an educator. I don't know how it goes back and forth, but both. In the thought process, right, the expansion of curiosity comes with reading, right? Like my kid, kids can imagine, visualize, place themselves in new countries, new areas, totally create the environment that they want to live in, and allowing children to read in that capacity with the thought process. When I teach in classrooms, even when I teach teachers how to teach literature, I expect children not only to visualize themselves in the text, right? And sometimes they can visualize themselves. You know, sometimes they can see themselves as a mirror. Sometimes they can see themselves in the window, and sometimes they can see it as a sliding door, right? But the thought process, and I asked them to explain that, whether or not the text itself is a mirror, a sliding door, or whether it's a window. And when I say that, my students are able to articulate what it is that they have learned through the text and are able to talk back to the text. And that is important as a person who teaches literacy, literature, reading, and composition. It is important that our children know how to articulate. And sometimes the articulation happens within the pages, being able to express themselves, being able to say, oh, this point is how I feel. And mom, now I have a question about what this is that I am experiencing myself. And I think that's a part of the problem, is the power within the book to help me realize and internalize what's going on within me. But in that same process, it is up to me as the educator to channel those questions for them to answer, not for me to answer, right? And I think sometimes that's where people get it twisted, that books are going to open them up to a certain thing, right? If your kid is into that, it might open them up. If they're not into that, it might just just acknowledge it, have them acknowledge that. But at the same token, it is not my job as an educator to put my own feelings into your child. It is my job as an educator to expand their thought, have them be curious, and then articulate back to me what it is that they want, or how they have experienced it, or how they had it, how it has moved their thinking or challenged their thinking, right? And so I think sometimes people miss that thought process, and because they miss that process, in my opinion, sometimes it is because that's what they do, right? Like they are projecting what they do, right? And because they are projecting what they do onto educators or onto other people, it feels like these books are going to help an educator indoctrinate their children. And that's not education. That's not even the best practice. That's not even good teaching. My job is to expand your curiosity and have you question yourself so you can think metacognitively and critically about what is happening abroad. And having those expanded point of views are necessary, because for so long here, we've always had a single perspective. And so I want to say that. And then I also want to say one thing about graphic novels, because my students, especially students, and this is not for all students, but in my experience, students who don't read on the regular, starting with a graphic novel changed their mindset about reading, right? Because it's graphic novels are multi-sensory, right? It has that imagery, it has that dialect, it has storytelling, it has different parts. It's so many moving parts, which is kind of like what we're in right now. People are always scrolling. And so it feeds that thought process of multi things happening at one time. And so I am a huge advocate of graphic novels in the classroom, and stories being told from alternative perspectives, and not even alternative, but a multi perspectives, and not from a single perspective, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So thank you for bringing that up and acknowledging that. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I think you are making excellent points. And I like what you said about how, books can transport us to different places, especially when you're growing up and you don't have a lot of money in your family. Kids can go anywhere in the pages of a book. And I like how you brought up the point that kids can learn how to articulate, what is happening to them, or relate to different points in the book, that really reflect back to them their own experience. And I think that reminds me of like this James Baldwin quote, is that where he says, you think that your pain is the worst pain that's ever been experienced in the world, and then you read, and then you see you can relate that pain to, the human experience, and you can develop empathy. And getting back to segregating books that that teach kids about their bodies into the adult section with the thought process that you're protecting kids. Well, what better way to put kids in danger when they're interested in learning how their body works, every piece of it, and then they have to go into the adult section to find those books.
That's a
If the book, if the if the thought process was to protect children, it's doing the opposite. It could put children in harm's way, and then kids may not learn from those books or not see that those books are in the library for them to access, so they won't be able to articulate if something is happening to their body. Or it could be something bad, something that somebody else is doing to their body. They can't articulate that. A lot of times kids, when they learn about their body, they can say, hey, somebody, touched me inappropriately. And that having that.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I think that's just why it's so important that kids are able to learn what they need to learn as they're growing up. And we shouldn't, like you said, restrict that knowledge or, like shrink the pool of knowledge that is accessible to people.
Right. I think two things that happens in that thought process that I would really like to unfurl is that, one, the attention to knowing your own body and having books in your body is thinking that is automatically projecting homosexuality is a bias, right? Because it's not, right? And I think that needs to be unfurled and said out loud, right? Because it's not that. That's number one. Number two, I am only going to speak for myself, so I'm going to use an I statement here. And growing up, my family my immediate family didn't talk to me about my body parts. And we had nicknames for body parts. And so when my body parts was violated by a person in church, I was molested by the church piano player. And so being molested by the church piano player and not having the actual language to say that a person was touching me, or, he went into my purse, or he's using language like purse or taco, or is not actually language about my body, right? And so having that language, not having that language made me have to wait until I learned the language to express what was happening to me, which caused extremely more trauma, right, in the thought process. And what I learned going through that, and this is the beautiful thing that I love about my parents, my mother and my father, is that they explained to me once I was able to tell them that, one, sick people go to the church, right? Like that is what the church is supposed to be. It is a healing place for those that are sick. And because of that, I don't want you to strike what happened to you against God, right? This is against the person who did this to you. And two, we are going to seek justice regardless if it was in the church, right? And so sometimes people try to say, don't do that because it happened in the church. No, my parents sought justice in regards to that. And then three, they communed with me from there on out about my body, about the importance of knowing language, and really sat down and talked with me about that, which made it so profound to me as an adult when I had my own children that I talked to them very early because of that. And my parents were able to say that they had fumbled the ball in a place, right? And didn't know that. Right? Like, and so in that thought process of having to experience that, to realize that there is something that I had negated and needed to go back and correct, I think my mother did a wonderful job in that. And I think that having books and having things to help her in that process made it easy for her to communicate with me. And I think the job of the mother is so important because of that, right? Like the mother is the first teacher. The parents are the first teacher. My father was equally instrumental in regards to that thought process of how it was going to be. But I think the misconception is that if children are learning about their bodies, that it's automatically has a homosexual or feel, and that is not it, right? And I think that is a misconception and even a bias or a prejudice in my thought process. And I don't know, hate itself is an issue with me, right? Like I just don't get into the thought process of it. And I'm a cisgender woman who am an ally, and I really feel like I am an ally for people, especially my people, right? Especially my people, because we have seen I'm getting extremely passionate. I don't know why. I feel like I'm on the front lines, like I'm ready to tell you. Because it's unacceptable for you to do that. It is just wholeheartedly unacceptable for you to, project your own stuff onto me. That's number one. And number two, presume that these books that are outlining our children's bodies are going to change who our children, who they are. I'm going to let my child decide who they are. That's it, right? I am going to allow my child to decide who they are. And my son and my daughter can do that. And I am going to love them with all of me. And I would expect them to be loved in that way, right? And I just really feel like these hyper attitudes about homosexuality or about the gay community is gatekeeping the wrong thing. Like you're creating a problem for the wrong thing. And I think that should be expressed. And I agree with you that moving these books from the children's section to the young adult section, or even to the adult section, can elongate the trauma and can cause people like myself to have to wait to express what is happening to me in a space that is supposed to be considered a safe space.
Yes.
And that's problematic.
Absolutely. And
that's
really
wholeheartedly problematic.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate you sharing that story of vulnerability that you experienced as a child, and relating that to why it's important not to censor books and segregate books. Because, same for me, like growing up as a gay man, a gay child, it was really hard to find that information, and you weren't getting that through formal education. It was hard to find those books in libraries at the time. I think it's a little more accessible for kids who are learning about themselves for the first time and just want to know more and want to know how to be in a healthy way, in a way where you don't feel shame, and how to overcome that feeling of loneliness, feeling like you're the only gay person in Indianapolis as a child is a very rough experience, because you don't know what to do. And the internet can only provide so much. It can lead you to learn about information that could be good for learning about your body, or how to take care of yourself, or information that is detrimental to your mental and physical health. And learning some certain information through word of mouth or can also have that same impact. So it's always good to have research on hand that is, scientifically studied or peer reviewed. There's a critical thought going into the works and things like that. And that definitely needs to be accessible through the library, so that people have access to all kinds of information. And really, it is just this small group of people that are wanting to impose their will on the majority, and thinking, and I feel like it's mostly a distraction, because these people with power don't have any real solutions to the problems that are manifesting, especially that were, happening before the pandemic and are just magnified after the pandemic. And I think they're just creating these distractions, these culture wars that we actually do need to address in real life. But why don't we not have people in power that are making decisions that make our lives better?
Mhm.
Why are they making these decisions that restrict our life and just want us to conform into that and say, your life will be better once you're exactly like me? I don't want to be like you. I can't be like you. I can only be myself. And not having access to information, it's harder to learn about yourself and it's hard to appreciate yourself and then just accept yourself for who you are
Exactly.
when you don't have access to that information. So, like you said, the libraries can be life-saving, life-changing places.
Definitely. And I really feel like it would not only was that library an opportunity for me and my family to explore some of the things that my mom, said that she should have done earlier, but it really opened up me to the librarian to say, oh my God, there's a whole world out here. I want to be in here all the time. Right. Like, and that's part of the reason when I travel now, what the library and the art galleries are one of the first places that I go
Yeah.
because of that experience, right? Yeah, and so I wrote about my experience being molested in one of my first books, actually my second book, The Liberation of L.B. Jones. And so being liberated in the thought process, I feel like I have to share the story because some people forget certain parts of it. And that's why I shared it with you, is because I didn't have access to books that talked to me about my body, that I was able to talk to about my body, that process was extended and it shouldn't have been. And and I think you're right in regards to that. Moving those books from children's sections to the adult section can do that. It can cause additional harm. And we're not looking at it from that perspective, right? And maybe those perspectives should be more vocal. I'm not going to keep you too much longer, but I do have a couple of more questions in regards to, especially as it relates to this thought process of Black authors and historically accurate text and reference. I am in the process of finishing my PhD and having primary and secondary resourced information, knowing where to get that from perspectives that are Black and are sometimes it's hard to find,
Hmm.
and even more so sometimes it's hard to explore, especially as it relates to rhetoric and composition, right? Like what is it that should be taught in regards to that thought process? And so what do you think the general public's and I know you can't speak for all the general public or people in power, but why is there a constant push to destroy historically accurate text and have that resourced, gatekept or banned? Like, can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I think that that is coming hard. And what's happening in Hamilton County is different, but not so much as it relates to our schools, though, right? And that's right here in Indianapolis. So can
Right,
you talk a little bit about that?
right. So yeah, I think the book bans, those in power who want to restrict our access to information, are just creating that distraction again. And I think it's to our detriment as we can't really expand and grow as human beings, and especially our knowledge and ways of being. And the book bans aren't really affecting the public library. What they're going after are the schools. They're going after media specialists in elementary and high schools, where a librarian or library worker can actually be arrested for doing their job. And it's really upsetting to see that or hear about that somebody for just doing their job is a target for arrest, and making someone doing their job seem like it's a criminal act or criminal behavior. It just really goes to show how powerful our history is and how important it is to learn it, as it was told, so that these people can't control you in such a way. And that's why they want to restrict access to history and in our information. When I was in graduate school at IUPUI in the public history program, I wanted to do my historical research on Black gay contributions to the development of Indianapolis.
Mhm.
And, you know, so I would consult different archives around the city, different, you know, historical society, state library. And I remember one archivist telling me that, you know, I probably have to go do this research through a roundabout approach. You know, they didn't really have anything for me. And it's just like, but there's so many, you know,
Yeah.
LGBTQ people here. Like, how are we here in a city that's supposedly conservative? And I think partly it's because archivists and librarians over time, I think unconsciously, and which is why it's so important to have a library work staff that's representative of the
Mhm.
community,
Mhm.
unconsciously just collected history that reflected conservative values. When there's always been this progressive kind of motor to Indianapolis, especially within the Black community, because what I found in my research is that, and these were through digitized copies of the Indianapolis Recorder, held at IU Indianapolis now. Um, And with that, I was able to find that the jazz clubs along Indiana Avenue were having these robust drag shows from 1933 up through the end of the avenue around the 1970s. So you can see that the Black community in that time was actually really important to
Yes.
like queer identity formation within the city of Indianapolis. And this wasn't just unique to Indianapolis, but it was happening in Black communities all over the country, where these drag balls were very popular,
Mhm.
and people wanted to see them, and they would perform along with these jazz artists and things like that. And they are very respected members of the community. Like the Recorder even published obituaries of some of the drag queens. So it just showed that they had an impact in the community and the city. But that history never gets told. That history
Yeah.
just gets it's erased.
Yeah.
You
And
never
it
get.
shouldn't be.
And
Yeah.
it shouldn't be. We're, you know, queer people are part of the Indianapolis community as much as anybody else. So that history needs to be told. And I think it gives us a power when we learn that history. It gives us a certain power where these attacks, these words, these laws, they don't really affect you because you're like, okay, but we've already been through this. We know
Yeah.
how to overcome it, and we know how to move forward. And that's where we want to go. We want to keep moving our society forward where things get better for everyone and not worse.
I love that thought process too, of what you just shared some information that I didn't know. I didn't think that it did not exist, but I didn't know that it was so prominent. But it also, for me, it helps me understand the beauty of my culture, right? I love, 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 love Black people. And because of that, I I love the diversity within us, right?
Yes,
Like all up and down Indiana Avenue was a lot, right? And it was ours. And we were not afraid to show you all of us, right?
yeah,
And so, whatever that may be, whether you were into jazz, whether you were into fashion, reading, food, whatever these balls that you're talking about, it is us. And we are going to celebrate us that whole time, right? Like, I don't know, that brings me joy. It just,
yeah,
it brings me joy. And I love that because it's a continuation of who we are and who we are as a people in regards to our acknowledging and accepting people for who they are.
yes, yes,
I think that's one quality that we do as a culture so well. Like it is easy for us to accept people for who they are. And we have demonstrated that throughout history itself, right? Like we are not the people that even when you have harmed us, right? We have even learned how to say, I'm going to stay away from you, but
yeah,
that's who you are, right? When you show us that you are harmful for us, right? Even sometimes to our detriment. And I think sometimes people feel like we are the enemy because that's the propaganda, right? That the Black people are going to come and be the gangsters. But if we were that already, we would have already destroyed you. And we haven't. You know what I'm saying? Like we would have.
Right.
Right? Like we would have
Right.
done that right after enslavement. We would have done it, we would keep doing it after you continue to murder our children on the streets. But our makeup is a more spiritual makeup, and I don't feel like we're like that as a human being or humans. But my last thing in regards to the library is this sweeping amount of money that is being used for are taken and used. Can you just show me and help me understand how the library's monies is being how it is gained, and then how is it used?
Yeah. So we get funding through taxes, property taxes, and different other kind of tax streams. I'm still learning as a new board member how all that works.
Okay.
And then I also know there's another stream of revenue that comes from the Indianapolis Library Foundation, and they help fund a lot of the programming for the public library. Pretty much all of the public programs are funded through the hard work of the foundation. So part of my work on the board is I'm on the facilities committee, and we look at upgrades for certain buildings, furniture. We talk about security issues and things like that. And so a lot of libraries are getting ready to get upgraded. And then there's the Fort Bend Harrison branch that's opening on August 19th. That I'm really excited about since I'm from Lawrence. I'm really looking forward to seeing that space. And so yeah, we try to make decisions where I try to think about, supporting decisions on how the money is spent, and yes, expanding our library services, expanding access, making very welcoming and beautiful spaces. So if I go to a branch and I see maybe some of the chairs are tattered, I'll take that back to our facilities director and just, heads up, this is what's going on over here, and some of the fabric was coming off on my clothes. Can we do something about the furniture? And I'm advocating for the support of the board to ensure that children's librarians are supplied at every library.
Nice.
And I know I live in Hallville, so we do not currently have a children's librarian position. So I'm and as well as Martindale Brightwood and West Indianapolis. So I'm just looking into seeing that those issues can maybe change and get addressed. So I'm advocating for that because I just remember how instrumental a children's librarian was for me coming up. And my mom would always take us to the library, the Emerson branch that's no longer around, the Lawrence branch. We go there, Eagle branch, and things like that. And the children's librarians were always so helpful in getting these books or getting me interested in reading and things like that. And it's such a specialized craft that I think that each library would definitely benefit, each community would benefit with a full-time children's librarian on staff.
Yeah, I agree with that. They would benefit for that. I'm sorry. I wanted that to be my last question, but I want to talk a little bit about the Center for Black Literature. And I also want to talk about what's happening in Brooklyn with this art exhibit and pairing the library with an art exhibit, and how that has just really changed the game for the library. The Brooklyn Library, since they had exhibited the Jay-Z lyrics, has had 4,000 new members. 4,000 new members because of an art exhibit and hip hop. Now that's a whole nother thing, right?
That's amazing.
That's a whole nother thing. So I love that thought process. And I think the downtown library has really done pieces of that with this Center for Black Literature, right? And so talk a little bit about how that came together. I think that is just amazing for us as a community and for the Indiana Public Library. It's just awesome. I had an opportunity to go in there the other day, and I think I checked out 30 books.
Yeah, that is such a beautiful space. And when I was working for the public library on staff, it was really awesome being a part of the creation of that space. I think Nichelle Hayes is a visionary.
Oh my
She
God.
had brought a lot of great ideas. She knew how to meet the needs of the community and making it a bookstore style type space and doesn't feel like a stuffy library even though it's in like the Carnegie, like the old part of the library, it feels very new. It feels
Oh,
very
it
welcoming.
does.
If it's just a very inviting space, and I always get so inspired when I go in there with like
Yeah.
the different kiosks explaining history and different
Yes.
authors and all these things. I think Nichelle just did a great job curating that space and making people feel welcome and invited, even people who aren't Black. I think she created a space where everyone can go in there and learn something. So she always described it as a place of windows and mirrors, like you said earlier, where people can see themselves reflected in the space, or people can learn about what it means to be a Black American or the Black diaspora through the study of the books in that space.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just it started in I want to say it's 5 years old now. So it started with one million over $1 million grant from the Lilies, and I hope they return to supporting the CBLC and other funders as well because like you said, it's just such an important space in the city and one where the Indianapolis Library Public Library is really showing that it's moving into the 21st century.
Yeah, yeah. I hope to one day not only see my work as an art exhibit, but the works of Mari Evans. I can visualize Mari Evans, Etheridge Knight on the front of the library, right, as an art exhibit. Yeah, clarity as a concept for sure. Could be on the
Absolutely.
front. Tasha Jones' work, The Liberation of LB Jones, could be on the front. Like I really love that idea that the Brooklyn Library is doing and possibly
Um,
bringing it here to Indiana. But
Yeah, we
Nichelle,
also have the Meet the Artist exhibit. That was first put on by the artist in residence, Tony Radford, who recently retired.
yeah.
He's been with the library a long time, I believe over 30 years or so. And he started the exhibit in the 80s, I believe. And it comes around every spring in Black History Month in February. Um, and he started it because there were so few art galleries in the city of
Yeah,
Indianapolis that where Black artists could feature their work.
yeah,
And he's like, well, we have this library, and I work for the library. I can, really try to help push this forward. And I think Tony Radford made it walked so that butter could run and all these other
yeah,
amazing art installations throughout the city and all these artists getting their just desserts nowadays and having access to galleries. I think Tony Radford really made it possible for that happen through the Meet the Artists, where he has artists come in like painters and then also fashion designers in the
yeah,
city to feature their runway work. And it's just a good time and a really big draw into Central Library every year. It's a great event.
yeah. I'm very familiar with it. I've performed it. Tony has hired me a couple of times to do it, but I'm speaking more so to the word art. Um,
Hmm.
how words can cover and become an installation. And I love that concept. And so I can't wait for that to happen here too.
Right. Yes, that's great.
Well, thank you so very much for your time. I really appreciate that. I think I could talk to you for hours.
Yes, I think so too. Yeah, this was a great discussion, Tasha. Thank you so much for the invite.
Thank you. And I really appreciate it. I'm going to be looking forward to seeing you at the Fort Benjamin Harrison on August 19th. And then just around the city. And please let me know how I can be supportive of anything you got going on. And I will let you know how you can be supportive of anything that I have going on. But thank you so very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Tasha.
Bye.